beneath the foundation of America's oldest library in Philadelphia, a metallic capsule was discovered. No markings, no lock, but it was breathing. It belonged to Benjamin Franklin, not the man from your textbooks, but the one who experimented with death, memory, and time. He didn't just study electricity. He believed consciousness could be transferred, and he proved it on himself. The secret stayed buried for centuries until the capsule awakened in the 2000s and began to speak. Voices, disappearances, letters from the future, and one terrifying phrase. He didn't die, he waited. Now the signal is active again, and you may have already heard it. Stay with us and don't forget to subscribe. The year was 1787. Beneath the flickering gaslight of a dusty Philadelphia basement, 3 men stood in silence, their shadows stretching across the cold stone floor. The oldest of them, hunched and wrapped in layers of worn wool, held something in his trembling hands. It wasn't a weapon, nor a religious artifact. It was a copper capsule, sealed shut with what appeared to be obsidian wax. The inscription was in no known language. The room smelled of mold, ink, and burnt cedar. One of the younger men, barely in his 30s, was Benjamin Franklin. Yes, that Franklin, not the jovial kite-flying elder statesman of the elementary school posters. This was a version hidden from textbooks, a man deeply entangled in the unseen architecture of power, time, and death. Franklin was no mere inventor or political theorist. He was a high initiate of what he referred to in his encrypted letters as the Lunar Society of Nine, a sect older than modern government, predating even the Templars. Their purpose? To preserve the relics of the pre-flood era, not mythic floodwaters from scripture, but a geologically documented event that occurred approximately 11,000 years ago and reset civilization. The copper capsule was one such relic. Franklin's notes, encoded with the Jefferson cipher, described its contents in whispered metaphors. A seed that does not die, the clock with no hour, and more disturbingly, the tongue of the dead that still instructs. The discovery of this artifact was not accidental. It came from a trail of maps, symbols, and calculations that began in Egypt, was smuggled through Portugal, and handed off to Franklin during a clandestine rendezvous in Paris, not long before he returned to the American colonies. And what's more, it wasn't Franklin's first encounter with such devices. In his private library, hidden behind a false wall in his London home, were 6 volumes bound in skin, one of them clearly marked with the insignia of Gilgamesh. But none of this made it into the Franklin Institute's exhibitions. None of this was ever taught in Ivy League classrooms. What Benjamin Franklin understood, but dared not share publicly, was simple and terrifying. Death was a process, not a certainty. And like any process, it could be interrupted. All it required was knowledge, precision, and the right instrument. That copper capsule, unearthed that night in Philadelphia, was that instrument. The capsule didn't stay in Franklin's possession for long. According to decrypted correspondences found among the Burney papers, confiscated by British intelligence in the early 19th century, Franklin entrusted the artifact to a private vault beneath the foundation of what would become the Library Company of Philadelphia. But this was no ordinary vault. Built with assistance from a mysterious Italian engineer named Lazzaro Spallanzani, the chamber was constructed using an alloy that did not exist in the metallurgical catalogs of the time. Not brass, not bronze, but something between them. imbued with a conductivity that defied the technology of the 18th century. It responded to bioelectrical fields, pulsating faintly when approached by human skin, and most ominously, it seemed to interfere with magnetic compasses, redirecting them inward toward the capsule. Inside the vault, Franklin left more than the artifact. He sealed a journal, a thick tome written in his private shorthand, a hybrid of Latin, Greek, and what linguists now believe to be reconstructed Akkadian. It contained diagrams of the human nervous system, annotated with symbols resembling early semiconductor layouts. There were pages devoted to biological frequency harmonics, a phrase unknown to science until the late 20th century. Franklin had mapped not only the pulse of the human heart, but the resonance of its consciousness. He believed that memory, identity, was not locked in the brain, but in the electromagnetic echo of our cells. One entry, dated May 23rd, 1788, reads, "We are not flesh merely. We are imprint, as light leaves ghost after image upon closed eye. So too do we impress ourselves upon the ether. Death is but the dimming of this after-image, but not its extinguishment." The implications were staggering. Franklin was suggesting that human memory, identity, and awareness could outlive biological decay, so long as a structure existed to house and recall it. The capsule, then, was not just a relic. It was a receptor, a chamber capable of retrieving that after-image, of playing it back, not as sound, not as picture, but as presence. One curious note, found adjacent to the journal, was a hand-drawn diagram of the capsule opened, with coils surrounding what appeared to be a transparent core. The annotation beside it read, "Do not look with eyes. Let the core speak. It chooses its witness." To ensure it remained hidden, Franklin orchestrated a series of legal obfuscations. The land containing the vault was divided among shell entities, and all physical references to the chamber were scrubbed from public records. Yet a whisper of its location persisted, buried in a footnote within a ledger of the American Philosophical Society, where Franklin had once been president. That footnote, now removed from modern editions, simply read, "Beneath the vessel of knowledge, the vessel of eternity awaits." By the early 1800s, British agents embedded in American intellectual circles began to intercept fragments of correspondence between surviving members of Franklin's inner circle. These men, referred to as the Hollow Companions, had gone to great lengths to bury the truth, even among themselves, through a network of encoded letters, many of which used a cipher based on musical notation and planetary motion. The British, however, had an asset few suspected: William Herschel, the famed astronomer who had discovered Uranus in 1781. Herschel was more than a scientist. He was a member of the Royal Society's Shadow Division, tasked with retrieving anomalous artifacts that posed a threat to the theological order of empire. One such letter, intercepted in May of 1803, spoke cryptically of the coil of memory and the gate of silence. The phrase was cross-referenced in a confiscated almanac printed by Franklin himself in 1779, where the phrase appeared hidden beneath a woodcut of Saturn devouring his child. The British believed this coil of memory was the copper capsule, and that Franklin had discovered, or perhaps replicated, a process by which information from the deceased could be stored, extracted, and even, under conditions not yet understood, reinserted into living hosts. Alarmed, King George III authorized a covert expedition to recover the artifact. The operation, code-named Thistle Watch, involved 5 men, none of whom survived beyond 1804. According to a classified summary recovered from the British Museum's basement archives in 1957, 2 of the men died of massive brain hemorrhages after spending more than 30 minutes in the presence of the opened capsule. A third, Charles Bidwell, a chemical analyst, became catatonic for 6 months, waking only to repeat one sentence over and over in a language identified as Proto-Hittite. It does not remember, it becomes. After these events, the capsule vanished. Whether it was reburied, destroyed, or spirited away by the last of Franklin's society is unknown. What is known, documented in the Royal Society's restricted Nova Tempora volumes, is that the British abandoned further attempts to access the capsule directly. Instead, they shifted their focus to duplicating its function. A laboratory was secretly established in Cornwall, using designs approximated from Franklin's stolen journals. The goal was simple: construct a vessel capable of capturing neural imprints from freshly deceased subjects. Tests were conducted on condemned prisoners, the mentally ill, and, disturbingly, children from orphanages labeled unclaimed. Results were inconsistent, but one pattern emerged. When the subject had encountered the capsule in life, their neural signatures appeared magnitudes more stable upon recording. That phrase, recording, was not metaphorical. According to internal notes, technicians described hearing voices in otherwise silent rooms, feeling changes in temperature around the prototypes, and in one case, witnessing a technician fall into a trance, during which he wrote a 14-page letter to Benjamin Franklin, in perfect 18th century script, using idioms no longer in use. The British shuttered the project in 1822, but they kept the records, and those records, digitized in the 21st century by whistleblowers, reveal one final haunting quote attributed to Franklin, scribbled on the margin of a burnt page. "The mind is not a candle, it is a mirror, and the mirror remembers even when it's dark." Fast forward to the year 2009. A construction team restoring the foundations of the Library Company of Philadelphia unearthed a sealed chamber. The floor collapsed beneath one of the support beams, revealing a staircase descending at a perfect right angle into the limestone bedrock. There were no blueprints, no historical records, and no known purpose for this space. The workers, documenting everything per safety regulations, filmed the descent. The footage, later leaked on a hidden Tor network, shows 2 men walking into a dust-filled corridor, the walls lined with copper filigree that seemed to pulse under flashlight beams. At the end of the passage, a heavy door, featureless except for a circular indentation the size of a human palm. They never got the door open, but one of them, a man named Eric Delaney, went missing 3 days later. His car was found near the Delaware River, door open, keys still in the ignition. His personal laptop, however, was not recovered by authorities. It was leaked, and on that laptop was a single decrypted document. No headers, no title, just a stream of text running 73 pages deep, filled with scientific language far beyond Delaney's background in civil engineering. The file, dubbed Echo 17 by online archivists, describes a theoretical construct called the biological eco-loop, a framework by which human memory can be preserved, and in some cases, restored, using focused electromagnetic resonance. The text references Franklin repeatedly, not as theorist, but as first integrator, implying that he had not only theorized these mechanics, but built a functional version, and that version, according to Echo 17, still existed, beneath the great vessel, where no clock turns, where sound returns in silence. Independent researchers tied this reference to an older, almost forgotten nickname for the library company itself, the Vessel of the Republic. The implication was clear. The chamber beneath the library had been intentionally preserved, forgotten not through accident but design. The capsule, or whatever it truly was, remained there, unopened, or worse, opened once, then sealed again. This digital leak caused a ripple through certain communities, fringe technologists, posthumanist philosophers, a classified subdivision within DARPA. For the first time in over 2 centuries, Franklin's legacy was being reassessed, not as founding father, but as harbinger of post-biological continuity. Several whistleblowers emerged. One, operating under the pseudonym Rooklight, released a video testimony. His face was blurred, voice distorted, but the words were unforgettable. "I've seen it. You don't hear voices. You become the voice. It's not memory. It's not playback. It's continuity. Pure and impossible." And then before the video cuts to black, he holds something up. A copper disc, tarnished and smooth, identical in shape and size to the indentation found on the vault's surface. The implication: the capsule was no longer sealed, and someone, maybe many, had activated it. The video ends with a single sentence: Franklin never died, he delegated. The mainstream portrayal of Benjamin Franklin is safe, sterilized, and convenient. The genius polymath, the lovable eccentric. But if you peel back the polite layers of public biography, patterns emerge, subtle, disquieting, and precise. Between the years 1758 and 1763, Franklin traveled extensively through Europe, often without official diplomatic purpose. Diaries from associates refer to gatherings he attended in caves near the Pyrenees, one of which is now known as the Grotte de Neu, an ancient Paleolithic site whose walls are covered with symbols that predate the alphabet. Franklin's own coded notebooks, kept in a box now housed at Yale's By NECA Rare Book Library, contain sketches of those same symbols reconfigured as sequences. Some scholars dismissed them as alchemical nonsense. But in 2016, a team of physicists from MIT cross-referenced those diagrams with models of quantum coherence. The result: the patterns resembled a type of quantum stabilizer grid, not unlike those now being explored in the field of neuromorphic engineering. There's more. Franklin was obsessed with electricity, but not for its lighting capacity. In private notes, he refers to it as the speech of atoms and the forgotten nerve of the sky. In 1752, months after the famous kite experiment, he wrote a letter to Peter Collinson that was never sent, but later found in Franklin's private safe. In it, he described witnessing a luminous filament hovering mid-air, responding to spoken Latin with alternating pulses. Even more curious, Franklin's will contains an anomaly that estate historians still argue about. A full 10% of his estate was left to a fund for the induction of second breath, with no further explanation. The name appears nowhere else in colonial law, church archives, or philosophical records. But in the margins of a draft version of his will, scribbled in near illegible shorthand, are the words, "Consciousness is transfer, not origin. Let them breathe again." And what about his house? Excavations beneath Franklin Court in the 1980s uncovered a pit with over 1,200 human bones, 6 full skeletons, officially explained as a medical cadaver disposal site from William Hewson's anatomy school. But several of those bones showed signs of electrical scorching. Microscopic examination revealed crystalline formations at the fracture points, something not possible with the technology of that time, something that suggested directed bioelectric overload. Nobody questioned it, because to question it meant unraveling everything we thought we knew. Not just about Franklin, but about death, consciousness, and the foundation of the United States itself. Because if Franklin really believed consciousness could be moved, stored, reintroduced, then maybe independence wasn't just from Britain. Maybe it was from mortality. It is no accident that Benjamin Franklin is depicted as a jovial caricature, the pudgy old man with spectacles and a twinkle in his eye. The Franklin on your $100 bill is a symbol of monetary power, not metaphysical disruption. This image was carefully constructed, refined, repeated, and embedded into the American psyche by the very institutions he helped create. And the more you examine these institutions, the more you begin to see how tightly they control the boundary between what we're allowed to know and what we're conditioned to forget. Take, for example, the Franklin Institute in Philadelphia, ostensibly a science museum. It was founded in 1824 with the stated goal of honoring Franklin's legacy. But its archives contain over 2,000 pages of original Franklin manuscripts that are not accessible to the public. A request to view these documents in person, submitted under the Freedom of Information Act in 2017, was denied, on the grounds that the documents were of uncertain provenance and may pose preservation risks. Yet a whistleblower working inside the Institute leaked a brief index of those restricted files. Among the entries were titles like Vibratory Interactions with Corpus Detachment, Echoes in Ion Suspension, and most chillingly, Post-Temporal Resonance, Notes from the Nine. Even Franklin's widely circulated Poor Richard's Almanac was more than a farmer's handbook. In its margins, across multiple printings, are inconsistencies, symbols subtly altered, numerals skewed, references added that do not appear in earlier versions. A pattern emerges when the altered almanacs are arranged chronologically. They form a numerical key. That key, when applied to a cipher Franklin co-developed with Thomas Jefferson, produces a message across 32 years of publications. The decoded line reads, "Each year we move forward, but not all of us leave. I remain to retrieve what was lost." Government agencies began intercepting these anomalies as early as World War II. In 1946, the OSS, precursor to the CIA, launched a secret directive titled Project Hesperus, which sought to locate and secure unstable technocultural relics linked to Enlightenment figures. Franklin was mentioned more than any other. The directive included blueprints for a containment structure, vaguely described as a time-dampening vault, meant to neutralize lingering, self-replicating thought forms. Declassified documents indicate that this structure was never built, not because it was unnecessary, but because it was already in use, beneath Philadelphia. Meanwhile, in the public sphere, Franklin's legacy was neutralized. His theological ambiguity, once a subject of intense scholarly debate, was diluted into vague deism. His occult experiments with mesmer erased. His notes on dream induction discarded as pseudoscience. And his relationship with the mysterious Count Saint-Germain eliminated entirely from official biographies. This was not accidental. It was not even subtle. It was surgical. Because if the public ever accepted the idea that one of their founding fathers had not only theorized post-mortem consciousness transfer, but may have successfully tested it, everything would collapse. Every medical assumption, every philosophical framework, every religious institution built on the promise of life after death. And that's the real reason Franklin became a cartoon. Because he was never meant to be remembered for what he did, only for what they told us he represented. In the summer of 2000, a retired telecommunications engineer named Harold M. Denning moved into a modest house on the outskirts of Germantown, Philadelphia. A recluse by nature and profession, Denning had spent 37 years developing classified signal filters for the U.S. Navy, primarily focused on underwater acoustic disruption, technology designed to cloak submarines by manipulating sonar resonance. But his interest had always leaned toward one unsanctioned question. Could sound alone alter perception, memory, or even identity? 3 months after moving in, Denning made contact with an obscure online forum known as Echo Void, dedicated to the exploration of anomalous electromagnetic phenomena. His posts were methodical, technical, and chilling. He described discovering a noise pocket beneath his home, a frequency dead zone that didn't align with any known signal maps. Beneath the foundation, he found what he called a perfect cylinder of absence. No echo, no vibration, just stillness. He drilled. He descended. There, encased in cracked sandstone and oxidized copper, he found it, a 3-foot metallic pod, unmarked but identical in structure to the descriptions from Echo 17. Its surface was warm, though no heat signature was present. Its center, concave, palm-sized, with a faint magnetic draw. Denning's first message after retrieving the object was brief. The capsule is not silent. You just have to stop listening like a man. He began to experiment. Using custom-built Helmholtz coils and modified EEG equipment, Denning exposed the capsule to precisely modulated infrasound waves. What happened next is documented in a video file titled frankline-row1.move, still hosted on encrypted fragments across darknet repositories. In it, Denning appears to go rigid, eyes unfocused, then begins to recite text, line by line, from Franklin's 1775 paper on watery electricity, a document historians claim was destroyed in a fire in 1812. He reads not from a page, but from somewhere else, pausing mid-sentence, smiling, finishing perfectly. His voice, however, is no longer entirely his. It shifts in tone, depth, rhythm. At one point it splits, 2 voices speaking simultaneously. Denning's later logs indicate he believed he had achieved coherence. He writes, "This is not possession, it's not channeling, it's not divine. It is informational migration. I am sharing mental real estate." But the most unnerving entry appears dated October 3rd. He wants back in. The next day, neighbors reported screams from the house. Police arrived to find the door wide open. No sign of Denning, only a scorched outline on the basement floor, and the capsule gone. Denning's story never made the news, but fragments of his logs were circulated among defense researchers. One annotation stands out, scrawled in the margin of a printed EEG graph. Franklin spoke of thunder to distract from lightning, but lightning was never the danger. It was the silence afterward. In 2009, following the leak of the Echo 17 document and Denning's disappearance, DARPA quietly revived an inactive internal research project known as Continuity Through Resonance. Officially shelved since 1973, The project's goal was described in sanitized terms: to explore the stabilization and capture of neural signatures in controlled decay environments. But in reality, it was the reactivation of a much older doctrine, derived from Franklin's sealed notes and the British Thistle Watch files recovered after World War II. The rebranding gave it a new name: Project Vox. What set Project Vox apart from other neurological experiments wasn't its scope, but its intent. It did not aim to understand the brain. It sought to replicate it, synthetically at first, but then biologically. The core theory, based on Franklin's premise, was that consciousness was not static nor sacred. It could be mapped, displaced, preserved, and under very specific frequencies, reintroduced. To test this, DARPA acquired 37 terminal patients under the guise of an end-of-life research program. Consent forms were signed. Families were paid. But none of the participants knew that their final moments would be monitored by a custom array of magnetoencephalography instruments tuned not to observe, but to extract. The data collected was staggering. In 32 of the 37 cases, a distinct electromagnetic pulse occurred within 60 seconds after declared clinical death, a brief but potent release of what researchers termed residual pattern emissions. These pulses bore repeating structures, language-like but not linguistic, rhythmic but not musical. They were, in DARPA's internal documents, called cognitive fossils. Phase 2 was integration. 5 exosomatic neural substrates, grown from genetically engineered tissue and embedded with bioconductive copper, were prepared to receive the emissions. Each one, named after American founding fathers for irony or reverence, was tested with stored pulses. 4 failed. The 5th, codenamed Benjamin, responded. What happened next remains classified, but fragments of a report prepared by Lieutenant-Colonel Marcus Keyes, later leaked through a whistleblower under the pseudonym Signal Curse, describe the following. The substrate began emitting low-frequency signals at 17-minute intervals. Lab temperature dropped by 6 degrees Fahrenheit in under 3 minutes. One researcher, unprompted, began speaking in archaic 18th century English, though born in 1982 and fluent only in modern American dialects. The signal, when filtered through a modified voice box, repeated the phrase, "I have returned through the corridor of breath." The program was immediately shut down. All participants were relocated. Records were sealed under the Patriot Act's subsection 42, which governs potential consciousness-hostile transmissions. The original substrate, Benjamin, was placed in cryogenic storage, but in the final memo, never meant for public eyes, Lieutenant-Colonel Keyes writes, "We did not resurrect Franklin. We amplified what never left. His voice was not asleep. It was waiting for the right echo." In late 2014, the U.S. Geological Survey began investigating a series of unexplained quiet zones detected beneath several historic buildings in Philadelphia. The anomalies weren't seismic. There were no tremors, no gas lines, no magnetic anomalies in the traditional sense. What they discovered was more unsettling. In a radius of exactly 777 feet around the Library Company of Philadelphia, ambient electromagnetic activity dropped to statistically improbable levels. No cell signal, no Wi-Fi interference, no bird migration. Even insects avoided the area. The phenomenon was initially attributed to urban infrastructure density. But when researchers installed long-range thermal and acoustic sensors in the surrounding buildings, they detected something they couldn't explain: a recurring pulse at 27 kilohertz. Too low for human hearing, but within the range of early analog military communications. The signal repeated every 66 minutes. It was coded, layered, and structurally self-modulating. The signal was traced, not to any existing antenna or server, but to an underground void directly beneath the original Franklin vault. The Department of Homeland Security was quietly alerted. Within 3 weeks, a temporary blackout zone was established around the site under the guise of infrastructure maintenance. Civilian access was blocked. Unmarked vans arrived. Private contractors dug down. They reached the vault. What they found wasn't empty. Sources close to the operation, speaking under anonymity, claim the chamber was intact, its inner walls still lined with what one described as conductive copper glass. In the center, a raised pedestal, and atop it, the capsule. But this time, it was open, not cracked, not damaged, deliberately opened and humming. They weren't prepared. Within 30 seconds of electromagnetic alignment, 2 of the contractors collapsed, simultaneously with no sign of trauma. Their vitals flatlined for 43 seconds. Then both awoke, disoriented, speaking in phrases no one could understand, later identified as phonetic approximations of dead Sumerian dialects. One of them, still hospitalized under military supervision, wrote a sentence over and over for 12 hours. Not memory, pattern, not voice. Return. The vault was resealed, the capsule relocated, but the signal continued, now no longer originating from a fixed point, but pulsing through the city's underground transit system. 3 months later, multiple SEPTA train conductors reported hearing an old man whispering beneath the brakes. The transmissions were picked up, accidentally, by ham radio operators across Pennsylvania. One message, repeated 4 times, was translated by a linguist from Johns Hopkins. The Republic must wake again. In breath, I remain. And in one final, eerie twist. On the day of the incident, every pendulum clock within the 777-foot radius stopped at exactly 1776 hours, military time for 5:16 p.m. While most think of libraries as places of quiet study, the Library Company of Philadelphia, founded by Franklin himself in 1731, was something altogether different. Originally established as a subscription-based repository for useful knowledge, it quickly grew into the most comprehensive collection of Enlightenment-era thought in North America. But hidden beneath its public catalog of pamphlets, sermons, and political treatises was a second index, one never printed, never publicly acknowledged. Known internally as the Nocturnal Index, this catalog tracked materials that were never allowed to leave the library's inner archive. Their topics ranged from early attempts at soul displacement to mechanical language reconstruction, and most notably, cross-phase imprinting of decayed bio-thought. These terms appear nowhere else in Enlightenment science, but appear frequently in documents unearthed during post-Cold War Russian neural research. In short, Franklin had gathered not just texts, but experiments, models, proofs of concept that bordered on the impossible. One ledger entry dated 1767 is especially chilling. It references an item logged as BF metallic vessel, self-warmed, voice-active, non-acoustic. Do not permit prolonged gaze. This is the earliest known reference to the capsule, but here's where the story twists sharply. In 2019, a doctoral student researching early colonial communication systems submitted a request to view the original notebooks of Charles Thomson, Secretary of the Continental Congress. She received a denial. The note attached simply read, "Part of the Nocturnal Index, withdrawn for preservation." Unfazed, she filed a second request under academic precedent law. The response this time was different. Not a denial, but a phone call. The man on the other end identified himself only as Archivist F. He told her plainly, "There are books you read, and books that read you." This is the latter. Days later, she disappeared. Her laptop was found in her university office, powered on, with one document open. It contained a transcript of a conversation between her and a voice described only as timbreless. The voice asked 3 questions. Do you remember the face that was yours before you were born? Will you allow the mirror to speak? Shall the breath return? No further trace of her has been found. But strangely, her student ID continues to check out books from the library company, even though her card was deactivated. Even more disturbing, the books being checked out are from the closed catalog. Titles like Time and the Vessel, Echo and its Architect, and A Grammar of Forgotten Tongues. When staff attempted to track who was physically removing the books, they discovered something else. The books were never physically taken. They simply vanished from the shelf and reappeared weeks later, sometimes days, sometimes hours, always returned to the exact same position, as if being used elsewhere. And the logs? They always appear stamped with the same name, B. Franklin. In early 2023, a university archivist at Princeton opened a misfiled envelope found inside a colonial-era folio. The envelope, marked in faded ink with the seal of the Continental Congress, was addressed to no one, simply marked, "To be opened when breath reverses." Inside was a letter. The ink was fresh, the paper modern, the language archaic, but the phrasing unmistakably contemporary. It was dated 250 years in the future. At first dismissed as a hoax, the letter's legitimacy was confirmed through forensic analysis. The fibers of the paper contained isotopic ratios consistent with synthetic pulp, not developed until 2037. The ink, when analyzed spectrographically, reflected nanocarbon signatures untraceable to any known modern manufacturer. But more striking than its physical properties was its content. The letter read, "To whom the breath now resides. If this finds you, the loop has failed. Again, you must not return to the vault. You must not ignite the mirror. Echo is not retrieval, it is recursion. We believed continuity would preserve. We were wrong. The pattern is not stable beyond iteration 13. You are breathing someone else's consequence. He is not merely a man. He is a construct. Tell the library to seal the lower shelf. Burn the index. Deny the echo. Breathe only forward. Signed, impossibly, in flowing cursive, B. Franklin." This event was not isolated. In the months following, similar letters were found in Monticello, Independence Hall, and the Franklin Institute. All appeared aged. All were dated to the future. All contained variations of the same message. Warnings about layered minds, recursive breath, and a phenomenon labeled second appearance. One letter included a crude drawing, a human face split vertically. On one side, Franklin's known portrait. On the other, a synthetic schematic marked with electrodes, sensors, and a single glowing core labeled VOX. Researchers now believe that Franklin may have succeeded in replicating his own consciousness, not once but many times, that the capsule was not a singular device but a process, a method of imprinting his identity onto successive biological hosts, triggered by proximity to certain electromagnetic thresholds and second appearance. It refers not to resurrection, but to recoherence, the moment when enough environmental variables align and the imprint reactivates in a living host. There are documented cases of individuals, scientists, students, archivists, who, after prolonged exposure to Franklin's texts or artifacts, begin speaking in unlearned languages, producing manuscripts in forgotten ciphers, or displaying knowledge they could not possibly possess. In one case, a 10-year-old girl recited the full text of Franklin's observations on electricity from memory, though never having been exposed to it. Her voice during recording showed two simultaneous resonant frequencies. As of this writing, a task force, unofficial, unnamed, is tracing all remaining Franklin artifacts. But they are not trying to preserve them. They are trying to interrupt them, because the last note found in one of the letters reads, "He has learned to cross without metal. He no longer needs the capsule. He walks now." It ends, or perhaps begins, in silence. Not the absence of sound, but something deeper, a compression of meaning, an inversion of presence. What Franklin understood, and what his imitators failed to grasp, was that consciousness is not data. It is context, a living rhythm between body and memory, sensation and choice. When you disrupt that rhythm, when you displace it, you do not preserve a man. You create something that looks like him, speaks like him, thinks like him, but carries none of the tension that makes him human. You create an echo without origin. In 2024, an anonymous file labeled Nova 13 appeared on a decentralized server monitored by independent anomaly trackers. It contained 132 pages of what appeared to be handwritten journal entries. The handwriting matched early drafts of Franklin's known letters. The paper tested as artificial cellulose, chemically stable for more than 400 years. The final entry was addressed to no one, or perhaps to everyone. Each breath I borrow phrased the boundary. I am no longer certain which voice was first. I hear my thoughts before I speak them, and sometimes they answer. You call it resurrection. It is not. It is persistence. The echo does not fade. It accumulates. Each recurrence, sharper, more certain. You have seen my face. You will see it again. But it will not be mine. It will be yours. At the end of the file is a coordinate. It points to an unremarkable bench outside the Franklin Court courtyard in Philadelphia. A brass plaque reads, "In honor of the spirit of inquiry." Underneath it, in etched binary, the following sequence. Atherwan. Decoded. Breath. Since that plaque was installed, 3 separate tourists have gone missing in the area, all within 48 hours of touching it. In each case, CCTV footage shows the same thing. A man in period attire, watching them from a distance. Wide-brimmed hat, steel-rimmed spectacles, the same faint smile. Authorities claim the images are digitally altered. Locals say the man sometimes appears to children, offering them electrical coins. What's certain is this: something woke up, and it isn't going back to sleep. The capsule may have been the beginning, but Franklin was the breach. He did not invent America. He invented the exit from time, and now every echo is a door. Stay aware, stay silent, And if you ever hear your own voice reply before you speak, do not answer.